Meg.
Good afternoon, Scott.
Welcome to another week of Real Personal Finance. This week, we are going to chat about an account that can be really helpful for people. And maybe we'll call this something as boring as, should I invest in my health savings account? Maybe we'll think of something.
Definitely not clickbait, but okay.
Yeah. We're not out for clickbait. But yeah, it's something that we've run into with clients that we find can be helpful. And we actually think there's a few different ways they can think about it to help them. So today we're going to geek out on HSAs.
Yeah, pretty much every client I have in the tech industry has an HSA available to them.
Yeah.
So it's extremely common with the people I work with, and I imagine your clients too.
Same. And when we'll look at the caveats, but when we're looking at high income earners in tech and biotech who have lots of cash flow and high income, which means they have high taxes, this is one of those few places we can save beyond our 401k to help us in the current tax year. And we can look at ways that it can help us in the future as well.
And there's definitely a lot of coverage of how wonderful and glorious HSAs are on the inner tubes. And I think sometimes it just lacks a little bit of nuance. I mean, they're truly wonderful accounts in many circumstances, especially for people who are like our clients. But it is not just get an HSA eligible plan and go forth and use it. There are definitely some things you want to think about.
Yeah. So let's talk through those things. And the first, of course, is what is a health savings account, and do I even qualify to contribute to one, right? Would be the first question. So I'll take a stab at this one. Please add color where you feel it needs to be added.
Sure thing.
But so traditionally, if we had health insurance, it was through our employer usually. So for most of our clients, it is. And it was just this traditional form of insurance where there was like a gold plan, a silver plan, or a bronze plan, and we had to pay different amounts of insurance and different amounts of deductibles, right? That's the way it usually worked. And though that still kind of exists today, it's just that now there's probably two tiers, maybe even more than two tiers of plans we can choose from. One is kind of the traditional health insurance that we had. And a lot of this came as a little bit of color from when we went through Obamacare, and we had to figure out how to help people pay for all of these increased coverages we were going to have and make people eligible. Well, when all that happened, we had to come out with some new plans that had higher deductibles, the amount of money that you pay, and a higher premium plan where you had to pay more in premiums. And they kind of went like, well, how are we going to help the American people pay for this thing? And they said, well, we're going to create this thing called a health savings account. So like before health savings accounts, pretty much everyone probably remembers. So especially like the Gen Xers will remember it. Maybe a little bit of the older millennials, definitely boomers, this thing called a flexible savings account or flexible spending account. And that's where people would say things like, if you don't use it, you lose it. So like, you put this money in and you don't have to pay taxes on it. And if you get your prescription filled on your glasses or have some out of pocket cosmetically, you're good. But it was like $1,000. It wasn't a big number.
Yes, if there's one thing you take away from this podcast, it's that an FSA is not the same thing
as an
HSA.
Yeah.
It's way less good.
Yeah. So HSAs came around when this thing happened. And what happened was these plans came out where they would say they're HSA eligible. And that usually means they have a high deductible and they have a high premium.
And by deductible, you just mean how much money you actually have to spend on your healthcare before the insurance will pay a dime.
Correct. So a deductible just means like your deductible, maybe it used to be like $1,200 for a person and $2,400 for the family. Well, a high deductible plan, it's probably more like, $3,000 per person and $6,000 per family. So it just gets much, much bigger. And with those costs, this HSA account came out and the government basically said, hey, you're allowed to put money in this every year. And you don't have to pay taxes on it when you put the money in. And actually, you don't have to even pay FICA taxes. Social Security and Medicare taxes aren't paid on this money either. Which is
so
really
whatever
cool.
Money you contribute to it, you get a tax break.
Tax break goes in,
contributions.
And then you can use it to take the money out to go pay for your expenses, right? So that's cool. That's cool. And that's the main way that you know if you qualify is it's a high deductible, high premium plan. And it will also say it's HSA eligible.
Right. So, and here's another asterisk or footnote. Just because your plan is high deductible does not necessarily mean it's HSA eligible. So your plan has to note that it is HSA eligible.
Yes, yes. But if it is, that's great. And if it is through your employer and they offer an HSA, that's the best way to make that contribution because you don't have to pay that FICA, Social Security, and Medicare tax by making that contribution. It's a great way to go.
Yeah, so
Mhm.
you get a break on all income and FICA taxes. Yep.
Yep. And then for this year, if you're a family, you're allowed to put $8,300 into an HSA account this year. The total is the max. If you're single, it's half that, $4,150. And if you're over 55, you can do an additional $1,000. And contributions I'm not going to, it's not exact, but I'm just going to say most people will stop making HSA contributions when they turn 65, which means you're Medicare eligible. Once you're on Medicare, you're no longer making HSA contributions.
Right. And we're talking about the tax benefits of making contributions to an HSA. And I just want to add, because we work with many clients in, for example, California,
Mm-hmm.
where you get that tax break in your federal taxes, but there are some states like California that
Like
do not
California.
that do
Yes.
not give you any tax breaks for contributions to your HSA, which
They
really
don't.
sucks because your tax rate's really high in California.
Right. But you still don't have to pay FICA taxes on it too, which is nice.
Right?
So you're
All the federal
still better off.
taxes, you get a break
Yep.
on it for sure.
Now, let's say that you decide you have an HSA account, you make those contributions. What can you do with the money once you have it?
And it boils down to, well, you can pay your medical expenses with it. But the question is, your medical expenses now or your medical expenses in the future? For your average American, they're probably going to be better off using the money now to pay their
Right.
medical expenses because they don't have enough extra money to pay
Mm-hmm.
for their medical expenses in addition to contributing money to their HSA.
Right.
But for a lot of our clients, really high income clients who have spare cash flow, they can afford to both fund the HSA, leave it alone, and pay for any healthcare expenses out of pocket on top of the HSA contribution.
Exactly. And that's where the conversation usually starts. Most people that I've run into who have an HSA will come in and they'll say, yes, I have an HSA. And you'll go look at their balance and it'll be like $300. And I'll be like, yeah, I just use my HSA to pay for my medical expenses as they come in. And that's that's lovely because you explained they're getting that tax benefit in this tax year. And that's
Mm-hmm.
great.
Mm-hmm.
But the real benefit for a lot of our clientele is that that triple tax benefit, and that's we didn't pay taxes putting it in.
Mm-hmm.
Now we can put it in, and one of the things we'll look at when we can potentially invest it. So if you invest it, we let it grow tax free,
Second
and then in
tax
the
benefit.
second tax benefit, and then the third one is if we use it in the future for a medical expense, we can use it tax free in the future,
Triple
right?
tax benefit.
Triple tax benefit. There's it's kind of the best of all worlds.
Yeah, I don't know of any other financial instrument, shall we say, that gives you tax benefits going in, growing, and coming out. It's pretty astonishing. In a world where health insurance is usually crap for a lot of reasons, this is
Mhm.
one of those few shining stars.
It is, yeah. So long as you have that cash flow to make it work, right? Because the
Mhm.
the heart, if you to your point, like if you don't have the extra 5 or 6 grand in an emergency fund or in cash flow to fund medical expenses as they crop up, because medical expenses for younger people usually are unknown. Some years we have bigger years, some years we have less.
Mhm.
We just don't know what's going to happen, right? That's why we have insurance.
Yep.
But if we can afford to do that with cash flow, it typically works out well because it
Yeah.
allows us to take this money and grow it for the future.
Yeah, and you had previously, when we were having a conversation outside of the podcast, you had mentioned a particular use case that I had not thought of before, which was not only do you contribute to your HSA and invest it and let it grow so that you can use it at some point in the future after
Mm-hmm.
the HSA balance has grown to a very big number. You have thought about using it specifically for sort of end of life long term care expenses.
Mm-hmm.
Long term care expenses are this big, scary, unknowable cost of unknown size. Maybe you need a bunch of long-term care, maybe you need none. But I mean,
Yes.
the numbers are scary if
Yes.
you develop like dementia at the end of your life and you have to live in a memory care unit for several years. Um,
Absolutely.
and there aren't a lot of good solutions to paying for that other than out of pocket.
No, and we, but, in financial plans, we will build in a long-term care expense of a couple of years for each spouse
Mhm,
in the end of the year. But it's usually through traditional planning expenses or what's going to pay for it.
mhm,
But ultimately, if we can, like, so I'm in my 40s, and I was just like, man, if so, I was just, back of the napkin, if a 40-year-old starts putting $8,300 a year in, and you don't look at, and we don't worry about the fact that that number is going to get bigger in the future. We just keep it static at 8,300 for 25 years until if they retire at 65. If it grows at 8% per year because they're invested in funds, and we'll talk about that, it'd be worth about, I'm just going to round and say $600,000 when they're
mhm.
65. The thing is, if they just keep it invested in the same manner and don't touch it because they only want to use it for medical expenses at end of life, and that's the focus. Um, and over the next 20 years, they make no contributions to it because they can't anymore. That would grow to about $2.8 million. So it
Right.
would be a really good nest egg
Yep.
for medical expenses at end of life if it needs to be there. I mean, more so, right? That's bigger than it probably needs to be.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I really like about that is that I think you probably talk about this in somewhat the same way, having one goal per account. Right. So it's very clear. Your mental accounting is very clear. Like you want to save for a
Mm-hmm.
car and also a vacation and also a home remodel. It's very satisfying psychologically if you have three separate accounts for that. Or in my case, if you have the buckets at Ally, which I love with great love. But then
Yes.
you can just see, oh, that goal is actually funded. I see how much money I have set aside for that goal. And the idea of having an HSA that is your long term care insurance, shall we say, and putting that in finger quotes. It's not actually
Yeah.
insurance, but that's the goal of that bucket. That's the goal that bucket supports. That to me is very satisfying and comforting. Um,
I like it for the same reason. And I also like it because a lot of people, when they are thinking about shifting into retirement, they want to leave things to their loved ones or to charities or to other things. This HSA account actually is a lovely thing to use for medical expenses when you're in
mhm,
retirement, or especially later in retirement when the expenses get really high. Because
mhm,
that's like, we don't actually talk too much about my average clients my age in their 40s. So I'm not talking to them deeply about retirement yet.
mhm.
But like retirement, usually from an income standpoint,
Expenses.
an expenses standpoint,
Mhm,
resembles a smile. And I'm
mhm.
like just taking my finger and drawing a little U curve. And that's
Mhm.
because we spend more money when we retire on experiences and living and
The
doing
go
really
go
fun
years.
things. Yeah. And then we get into kind of the no go years. And then we
The,
get into where we need a
the
lot of health.
slow go, then no go. Yeah. So it's
Go
go
go,
go,
slow go, no
slow
go.
go, no
Yes.
go.
Thank
Yeah.
you for knowing what they are. Cause like you can tell how many we're deep in retirement planning here. Um, but what you get is like, we don't have anyone in those no go years yet, but those
Yeah.
will happen. And when they do, having the HSA account's great. And HSAs actually aren't a wonderful thing to leave to other people.
Yes.
If I leave my IRA to my boys, they have 10 years to distribute that income, right? They can hopefully do that over a number of years and pay less in taxes and let the
Overall,
assets
right.
grow a little bit over the 10 years. And that's really helpful. HSAs, the year in which you pass, you have to receive everything as taxable income, right?
Right.
That's like an HSA with a lump sum. So it's just not as efficient.
Right. So if you're married legally and you die with a huge HSA, a huge amount of money still in your HSA, and you leave it to your spouse, that's fine.
No problem.
That's
Yes.
no, yeah, no problem. But if you leave it to anyone but your spouse, that's when the problem you just described kicks in, and that you have to distribute the HSA funds all in 1 year. And
Right.
let's just say you've got $200,000 left in your HSA when you die, and you leave it to your son or sons. All of a sudden, they've got an extra $200,000 of income
Of
that year,
income.
which is going to kick them into much higher income tax brackets than they're accustomed to.
Exactly. Exactly. Um, So let's talk about, so if someone makes contributions to this,
Mhm.
can they make, how do we think about investing
Yeah.
when we think about an HSA?
Yeah, I mean, first thing we have to know is how much of the money can we invest? Because I'm sure you too have seen a variety of HSAs out there through our
Yes.
clients' work. And all of those HSA providers require a certain amount of cash to be held at all
Hmm.
times in the account, and you can only invest the cash above that threshold. Now,
Hmm.
sometimes that threshold is $0 and you can invest all of the money in your HSA. I think Fidelity's HSA is like that, or
Hmm.
maybe it's employer plan specific. I'm not sure actually. Um, Sometimes it's a very reasonable cash threshold, like $200, but I've seen as high as 2,000. You
Yeah, I
can't,
have as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't like that because that's a lot of money that you just have to keep as cash, earning basically nothing
Hmm.
for
Yeah, I
as
think it,
long. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead.
fully agree. I think it just depends. It depends on the individual and what your need is and what those investment options are, right? Because
Mhm.
one of the cool things about it, because you might think like, well, what are you talking about, Meg? Like, if they have a $2,000 threshold, I just have to keep it there anyway. Because we often think about 401ks and HSAs similarly, but that's not true. So 401ks with your employer, you have to just accept what they give you. With an HSA account, if you don't like what they're offering, HSAs are what we call portable. So
Mhm.
you can choose to move the balance to another HSA account and invest it
While
uh,
you're still employed
while you're still
with that same
employed.
employer. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so
more
you
like
can
an
fill it up
IRA.
every year. So if you wanted to, optimize, the framework I would give you is through your paycheck, you're going to fully fund the account. And then as it's funded, you're going to move it over maybe once or twice a year, depending on the costs, right, to do
Mhm.
it and just the hassle of doing
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
And you're going to move it and invest it for yourself in a manner that does well for you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
HSAs are more like IRAs in that regard, in that they
Mm-hmm.
are not, I mean, they're tied in some ways to your employer, um, but you can move it, as you've said. And I think one thing we've neglected to mention, and it's not anything you have control over, but it's certainly a nice thing, is a lot of employers I run into, if you choose an HSA eligible health insurance plan, your employer will actually contribute.
That's another place to be clear here because the maximums that we were giving you earlier of 8,300, that includes the employer contribution. So, and the reason I give that to you is because your 401k, you can put away 23 grand this year and you just think 23 grand is my number,
Yep.
and they're matching on top of that.
Yep.
But to your point, yeah, there's a lot of plans where that's included, which is really nice. Bit more found money.
When we help our clients choose health insurance plans, the employer contribution is one of the few numbers that we're actually looking at.
Hmm.
Getting an HSA eligible plan with which has a high deductible, usually that means the premium is lower than for say
Hmm.
a regular old PPO.
Yes.
So already you're saving money with a lower premium. But
Hmm.
then on top of that, your employer, I mean, I've seen employers put $2,000
Yeah.
into an
Same.
HSA. So that
Yeah.
lowers sort of the total cost of that health insurance plan even more.
Yes.
Now, it is important to realize that HSA plans are not an obvious win. You actually do have to look at the all in costs of all of your health insurance options. Because, for
Agreed.
example, like if you also have a PPO whose deductible is $200 and out of pocket max is $1,000 with a higher premium, but then your HSA eligible plan has a deductible of $3,000 and out of pocket max of $8,000. There
Hmm.
is such a huge difference between what you will pay for medical care between the PPO and the HSA eligible plan that, as awesome as HSA accounts are, it might still be monetarily worth your while to choose the PPO.
And the other side of that is you can still be, if you had that idea of, oh, I just really like saving for that long-term care thing.
Mhm.
You can still do that. You can just do it through like a taxable account, right? Like set up an account and start putting additional funds aside for the future of a specific need, to the point that you were making before. But totally agree that you need to look at the cost benefit of both and decide what's best. And it is Rare, but it does happen what you're describing where you'll go look, you'll be like, man, the PPO plan's so much better than
Mhm.
the HSA eligible plan. Like this is a no contest. It doesn't make any sense for you to do this.
Yeah, when we help our clients, it's a little more involved than I can explain in a podcast, but we basically look at the minimum cost a client would pay on a plan and the maximum cost they would pay on the
Exactly.
plan. And the maximum cost is the premiums they'd pay
Yep.
minus any employer contributions
And then max out of
plus
pocket.
plus max out of pocket minus any HSA tax benefits
Mm-hmm.
they would get. And
Mm-hmm.
the minimum cost is simply the premiums minus any employer contribution, because even if you consumed no healthcare, you would
Right.
still have spent the premiums that year.
Right. You still
And
you still have to do it.
yeah, and
Yeah.
oftentimes just comparing those minimum and maximum costs on a plan will make it very obvious. At least in the world of tech employers, will make it very
Mm-hmm.
obvious which is the better plan financially. I will say on the Affordable Care Act marketplace, it is not nearly as clear whether HSA eligible plan versus, other bronze or silver plans. It depend in those cases, I find it depends so much on what your healthcare consumption ends up being.
Oh yeah,
Um,
totally. And that's another weight to measure as well. When you know you're coming, you have to ask yourself how you feel about out of pocket costs. And some people just like paying in more to a PPO type plan where the costs are lower and just normal life and they're used to it. And they
yeah.
don't like, even though this HSA benefit is here, there's going to be that year or two where they pay way more out of pocket and it'll still cost less over their lifetime if they're really healthy people, but
Mhm.
it doesn't feel good to them. So
Right.
there's this emotional component that really matters.
Absolutely. Yeah, the strategy we've been describing about how to maximize the benefit of an HSA, which is choose an HSA eligible plan, fund it to its max, but then pay all of your healthcare expenses out of pocket. The cost of your healthcare is going to be so much more salient,
Oh, yeah.
right? And that's hard for us as
Yeah.
humans.
Saliency is not fun.
Yeah.
That's why resorts do everything they can to remove it. Yes. Investing wise, if I was doing this for HSAs with clients and we're aiming for that long term time horizon of like I'm 40 and I'm aiming for 85,
Yeah.
like 100% equities more than likely is the allocation I'm going to lean toward because I just want this money to run for 45 years and grow as much as it possibly can. I don't have a need for it in the short run.
Yep.
If I had a need for it in the short run, where maybe this was my emergency fund to my emergency fund, one of the things you can do with health savings accounts once you have one is you can track those expenses that you are making during the 2024 year while I'm not choosing to take that out of my HSA account. And then let's say in 2025, I lose my job. Well, maybe I
Mhm.
burn through my emergency fund and I need my backup now. Well, I can go to the HSA administrator and I can say, hey, send me that check for all those expenses I had in 2024. Here they are. And they'll send them to me. Right. So it's another thing that's beneficial about an HSA.
Right. Yeah. The whole idea of contribute to and invest the money in an HSA now with the intent of not using it for another 2+ decades. Um, More than likely in retirement, the healthcare expenses in retirement are going to be enough to use up your HSA money.
Oh, yeah,
But
easily.
but just in case it's not, you can actually track, as you were saying, keep record of, keep invoices, maybe even explanation of benefits of expenses now. And 20 years from now, you can get reimbursed from the HSA. In year 2040, I can get reimbursed from my HSA for expenses I incurred in year 2024.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's
Um,
a little bit of an administrative hassle, and you have to sort of weigh how likely you are to actually follow through on that.
Yes, and that's for the future. And then the reason I went back though is if you have that, if you know you might need funds or you might want funds to be a backup, you
Mhm.
might want to have a bit more less risk in your HSA allocation
Yeah, or just keep a
today
higher cash threshold in it, right?
in the HSA account, and then
Yeah,
you're good too.
yeah.
Keep that $2,000 minimum.
Yeah, exactly, whether you're required to have it or not. I wanted to bring up one client scenario, that I think is
Hmm.
particularly well tuned to your idea of your HSA account being your long-term care fund, and
Yeah.
that is for clients who have, some sort of medical history that makes it
Mm-hmm.
impossible for them to get certain kinds of insurance, like long-term care insurance.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got a chronic disease, it is pretty unlikely that you're going to be able to get any long-term care insurance from an insurance company because
Yeah.
they're pretty sure they're going to have to pay out benefits. So if you
Yep.
can't get insurance, normally if there's a huge potential catastrophic cost in the future, we want to buy insurance to offset that, a little bit of money now and premiums to protect us from a possible huge cost in the future. If you can't get any form of long-term care insurance, then this HSA can be, again, with sort of all the caveats about if a PPO plan is in fact better for you, et cetera, et cetera. This can be a particularly powerful strategy for people who cannot get long-term care insurance in any
Yep.
form.
Awesome. Yeah. So get an HSA if it makes sense.
If it
Invest it
makes
if it
sense.
makes sense. Use it for long-term care. Could be great for you. Yeah. Really hope this frame was helpful. Thanks for your time, Meg.
You're welcome, Scott.
Bye. See you guys next week.